There we go. Okay, I'm Patrick Gannon, President Emeritus of the DSCA, and this is the February 15th meeting of the Downtown Sarasota Economy Association Zoning Code Committee meeting. And we have as our welcome here guests from the City Planning Department. And for that, David Lowe had a media conflict and will be here shortly, but he asked me to get things underway here. Staff has a presentation. We want to get through that, and then we'll have open question and answers. And first of all, I want to extend from behalf of David, our board, and our members here, I thank you for being here. And I appreciate that. I know you wanted to get the message out, and we're asking how many people on board here. But it's video, and it will be recorded. We will get that out to all of our members. But most importantly, coming out to meet with us. I know that we had dialogue last fall about having opportunities for meaningful neighborhood input. And we felt like this way, through the committee process, where we have people who have some interest and maybe some background, we're able to have that dialogue of both bi-directional, that people who are interested get informed and can ask informative questions, and you come away with some meaningful input. And so that's what we're looking for with this. And that's why I think we want to thank you for having this second meeting here. You had our input from the previous ones, you had your town hall from that, and you've got your presentation, I know, and we'll look at that. And if there's other questions, I'm sure people here will have dialogue on that. So thank you again for your time. And Steve, if you want to take it away and introduce your staff that's here, thank you again.
Sure. We'll start with directly across from me is Brianna Dobbs.
Hello.
Senior planner. To her left is David Smith, general manager. To my immediate right is Ryan Chapdelaine, general manager for planning. And then we have Rebecca Webster, who's a planner to his right. And so, thanks for inviting us. I'm just going to give a brief introduction and I'll pass it on to Brianna. As you know, we had a whole series of comprehensive plan amendments approved last year. And from those approvals, the commission directed us to move forward with zoning text amendments, which is actually the implementation stage of this effort. And so, tonight we are focusing just on downtown. We're not going to be addressing the commercial corridors or commercial sites. That's actually going to be started later this year. We're just focusing on downtown. We had our first town hall meeting on January 19th. Very well attended, some great questions and suggestions, and we're taking all that information into consideration. We also, this month, have really been having a lot of meetings with different community organizations, business organizations, to also gain input and suggestions before we move forward with the final recommendations on this zoning text amendment. So anyway, why don't I just go ahead and pass it off to Brianna, and then we can go through our presentation.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah. Do you?
I'm going to share the screen here.
Awesome. So just the first slide, we're here to talk to you about attainable housing and density bonus within the downtown zone district. So here for discussion and input. The next slide, we can kind of also bypass because Steve already went over the agenda of what we're going to be going over.
Yeah, take space.
The arrow keys.
Come on. Down arrow. I was trying to do the arrows. Okay. So
Maybe I touched the screen.
No, it's being generated from here, so.
Technical difficulties on this end, but if we can't get it to work, we can just speak to it as well. No big deal.
Yes.
house on the bottom.
Right, it looks like there's
The bottom,
two
very
arrows on the
is arrows.
bottom,
Yep, try that arrow, Patrick.
maybe
To
to
the
the
left.
left.
To the left, yeah, there you go.
Okay, yep, so there's the agenda, and Steve already covered what we're going to go over, so we can go to the next slide. So within Sarasota, in the past few years, been over a 46% increase in rents, and that's some of the largest increases in rents that we've seen in the country. So we have set goals of what we want to see for attainable housing, and we want this to be implemented citywide. So implementing citywide attainable housing incentives, focus incentives on commercial corridors in downtown, which we're focused on right now, here to talk about, to support multimodal transportation options. We're trying to incentivize the private sector to construct attainable housing, and this is consistent with our housing chapter of our comprehensive plan. And we want to target households not typically eligible under state and federal funding, and focus our energy on the primary demographic of 60 to 120% of the area median income. On the next slide, I'm going to speak to some of this stuff.
There we go. Mouse keeps moving around.
Okay, so yeah, so this slide you can see that there are other nonprofits and organizations that really focus their energy on 80% AMI and below. The Sarasota Housing Authority and Sarasota Housing Funding Corporation, they provide public housing that really focuses on 80% of AMI and below. Also project-based rental assistance, which is up to 80% AMI or below. Also the tenant-based rental assistance, which is 75% must be at 30% of the AMI. And then also they provide affordable apartments, which focuses on the 50 and 60 and 80% of the area median income. On the next slide, you can see an example of a project that was recently completed. The initial wait list for Lots on Lemon had over 1,500 applications. Approximately, there are 750 individuals on the wait list. And just since December, they've had over 100 new names added. This really does show the demand that we have. And the Lots on Lemon provided for 76 affordable dwelling units, so below the 80% AMI, as well as 54 attainable units, which is above that, for them, designated them for our hometown heroes in Sarasota. We also work with the City of Sarasota Office of Housing and Community Development, and OHCD serves residents throughout Sarasota County to administer state and federal funds for a variety of housing programs, such as the home repair program and projects involving the federal community development block grant funds. And I think it's important, so you can go to the next slide. And I think it's important to really focus our energies on the 60 to 120%, again, because there are other nonprofits in OHCD that is targeting the demographics of 80% and below AMI. So not only is there a need for attainable housing, there's also a benefit. Reports state that the creation of 100 affordable rental homes can generate almost 12 million in local income and over 160 jobs in the first year. Our city commission table, as well as we're here in Echo and other places in Florida, there are the business owners saying how difficult it is to retain employees. And so the effects, really feeling the effects of the lack of affordable housing on their businesses, including the inability to attract talent, increase commuting distances for employees, and weaken local spending by financially constrained families. And so investing in affordable housing yields great returns for the state through job creation, revenue generation, and increased individual and financial stability. So the next page, thanks. So our recommendations are consistent with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, or AHAC, which recommends different incentive strategies every year. One recommendation is that the city should consider additional density incentives, and this is in exchange for attainable housing. And on the right is the photo from the Blueprint for Workforce Housing, which was a document that was adopted by the City Commission in 2018. One example it provides is that the city should allow densities above the allowable base density in exchange for units for local workforce housing. So what was the next slide? Recently adopted this past fall is ordinance 225439, which allows for 4 times the base density when providing on-site attainable housing. And so this exactly correlates with these 2 previous documents we saw for the AHAC as well as the blueprint for workforce housing. This map shows the future land use locations of downtown Bayfront, downtown core, and urban edge. And so these are the locations that would be available for the density bonus if attainable housing is provided on site. Also within the comprehensive plan amendment that was adopted in the fall, we provided a definition of base density. And this is the maximum number of dwelling units per acre that's allowed on a parcel or development site prior to the awarding of additional density, as well as a definition for attainable housing density bonus. So currently within the downtown core, the zoning allows for 50 units per acre, and with the comprehensive plan amendment would be allowed to go 4 times that density at 200 units per acre. So the attainable housing bonus is that range from above 50 units per acre to the 200 units per acre. And that's what we're really focusing on, to find that percentage of attainable housing units in order to get this additional density. We have another guest joining us.
Hi.
Could you do the next slide, Patrick? Thank you. And in order to implement the changes to the comprehensive plan, we are working on drafting our zoning text amendment since we've been doing all this public outreach. Again, you can see the downtown core, downtown Bayfront allow 50 units per acre, but if attainable housing is provided on site for a minimum of 30 years, they could achieve up to 200 dwelling units per acre. There are some photo examples. These different projects you can see are similar in height, and setbacks and form. But the project on the left is at 25 dwelling units per acre, and on the right is at 75 units per acre. You can see there's no additional height, but the square footage of the floor plans goes from 4,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet. So allowing a triple in density doesn't mean necessarily bigger buildings, but it does mean that they will be providing smaller units. Next slide, please. In our downtown, in the downtown Bayfront, it currently allows for 18 stories as well as 50 units per acre. So we are seeing a lot of developments creating luxury 4,000 square foot units. If you click, it will show a sample floor plan of a 2-bedroom, 2-bath at 1,000 square feet. So by quadrupling the density, you could actually fit 4 of these units within traditional 4,000 square foot development in one floor that's being developed. So you can just click that, so multiple times, 1, 2, 3, 4. One more.
Oh.
And there's the idea of the 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment fitting within the 4,000 square foot floor plan, which is what's being developed today. So a vast majority of our households are made up of 1- and 2-person households. So our existing zoning at 18 stories and 50 dwelling units per acre is excluding individuals from being able to afford to live in Sarasota. And this does not provide for our demographics, and we're seeing over 82% of our households do not have children. So the timeline, if you click that again, an arrow will show where we are. We are in February, there'll be lots of presentations, obviously the DSCA, CCNA, the DIG, the neighborhood associations, and then in March, we will have our second town hall to go over the feedback that we received from the neighborhoods and to go over our proposal for the downtown DSCA. And we have been hearing the questions that we just frequently ask questions. We made some slides that we're going to go over. I think it's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, so as Bree mentioned, we had a lot of really great feedback from our first town hall. Our second one is coming up March 1st. But one of the frequently asked questions that we've heard a lot are, what are other local jurisdictions doing in Florida? And I think it's really interesting that we found in our research every other local jurisdiction that is working towards this is utilizing some sort of density bonus program to incentivize market rate developers to provide affordable housing. So we're continuing to discuss and learn from other jurisdictions on exactly what they're doing and what has been successful.
Next slide, please.
Thanks, Rebecca. Another question that seems to keep coming up is the issue of how do we ensure that these units are going to remain attainable? Well, we do have an affordability agreement that is recorded in the official records, designating these units as attainable for a minimum of 30 years. Should the owner not comply with the agreement, not perform, there are avenues that the city can take, and one is going through the code enforcement process with a special magistrate who can then impose fines for lack of performance. If there is still a lack of performance, then the city can go to circuit court, and the judge can also levy liens on the property, or fines and liens, and as well as imprisonment if there's still a lack of performance. So just want to be clear that, you know, these agreements are going to be recorded in public records and that they will be monitored annually. The burden will be on the owner to provide annual reports demonstrating that the units are being leased to households at the various income levels, and that will be required through the duration of the agreement. Next slide.
Ryan,
Yes,
a quick
sir.
question. You said leased. What about sold units?
Sure. The for sale units, similarly to the leased units, there'll also be covenants that will be recorded in official records showing that those specific units are required to be attainable for at least 30 years.
In the annual report, you said, who sends that to whom?
So it's up to the developer to send that on an annual basis to our Office of Housing and Community Development. And they.
Cities?
Yes, sir.
City, that's the city office.
City, yes, it is.
Okay, one of the questions in there is there anything in there in terms of what's disclosure in terms of, I guess it's having to do with the HOA fees? Or do you have another?
So
You have another?
I think that's going to be another slide. We will address that. That's coming up here
Okay, all right, well,
shortly.
let you do it.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
Okay, last question, which you kind of covered in the PowerPoint, is why can't the city only rely on the Sarasota Housing Authority and other nonprofits for attainable housing? Again, a lot of federal, local, and state dollars for affordable housing developments do not target residents making an 80 to 120% AMI. These are actually considered essential service workers, and that's defined by a state statute, including our teachers, our nurses, our firefighters, our service workers, and our healthcare personnel. And most Sarasota Housing Authority and other nonprofits target residents below 80% AMI. So on the next slide, I think when it's really important to understand what the terms 80 AMI mean, 120% AMI, and then below 80% AMI. And we also currently have a tiering requirement that we would like to continue within our downtown, that no more than 1/3 of the units can be designated between 100 and 120% AMI, and at least 1/3 have to be below 80% AMI. And so you can see here, even with that 100 and 120%, these are the salaries for the Sarasota MSA workforce. This includes a nutritionist, a surveyor, a web designer, and also registered nurses making $72,400. They are not able to afford a one-bedroom apartment within the city of Sarasota based on the median rents. Next slide, please.
Yeah, another question that we received was how will this affect parking downtown and overall city traffic? Density increases, yeah, in most cities. Really, when you're located in a downtown or in a city, it really opens up other ways of circulating around the city besides car. You know, people, can walk to work or walk to a restaurant, take the trolley, take the bike and scooter share. There are really a lot of different options. And so one of the things we've done is, that's already been passed by the commission, is reduce the parking requirement for attainable housing units to half a space per unit. First reaction is, boy, that sounds low, but actually it's kind of a national standard now. Whether you're located in an urban area or even a suburban area, you just don't need as much parking as you would a conventional unit. Plus, one of the other benefits of that is the cost. If you're building housing downtown and you have structured parking, right now each space in a parking deck costs at least $30,000 a space. And so if you have a unit that has 2 parking spaces per unit versus a half, that's $60,000 versus $15,000. So, for each unit, you're potentially saving $45,000 by building an attainable unit, which also helps encourage attainable housing to be constructed. And then, of course, when you have high parking requirements, it really just discourages infill development. The last thing we want is for all the affordable housing in the city to be 10, 15, 20 miles outside and people having long commutes. So this also really helps in that respect. And one of the things that people don't realize is that when you provide attainable housing in downtowns and close to downtown, it really does reduce the impact on our streets, especially the streets that are coming into town. You just have people don't have these long commutes anymore. They actually can walk to work, take transit.
Steve?
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there any kind of congruent effort going on with respect to transportation? When I grew up, I lived in an intensely urban area. We never had a car until I was a senior in high school because we had public transportation. Public transportation in Sarasota is not very good.
Right.
And it's really not designed to get the average downtown resident out of their car.
Right.
Is there some concurrent effort going on to deal with the transportation issue so that you do have an alternative for these people so that they don't get into their cars?
Right. Yeah, like I said, we've already started to the trolley and the bike and scooter share. Just to give you an idea, we had a record number of riders with our trolley last month, over 16,000. And combined, they both started in March of last year. Combined, by the end of March of this year, we're probably going to have over 300,000 riders. Now, that's not the cure-all. We have to do other things. One of the things we will be investigating is potentially having a north-south trolley route as well. We're looking at water taxi system. Some people have mentioned the iRide system and potentially, taking a second look at that. So we've implemented some of them already, and so far they've been really successful. There are going to be other transportation modes as well. And we're working with SCAP or I guess Breeze now. We're working with them as well. So there's more coming, but we've had some pretty good success so far.
Steve, one of the questions that was brought up at our last workshop meeting here was the question of not the car needs of the residents,
Right.
but the service vehicles. That you have more people and given the increased amount of delivery vehicles, and those of us in downtown Condo see that every day. We see the vehicles pulling up and those who can't park having to park on the city streets, et cetera. And people may not have a car, but they're still buying goods. Maybe it's just household cleaning goods and so forth, but it's being shipped in and being delivered. And not only that, but the servicing the units. We see, the service vehicles are there sometimes half a day. Home health care aides is another big thing. And oftentimes, the formulas that are in use, if the other vehicle needs are not considered, in other words, if that's reduced by that, I think that's going to cause a problem. So is there any way, I guess that's based upon the floor plan or the number of units, or what is it that drives, you have to have certain vehicles per number of residents, right? But then there are a number of vehicles based upon square footage, or what is the second? Or service and so forth?
I think it's for the number of units, it's one parking space per unit.
No, that's per resident. I'm talking
Right.
about, in addition, you have something for,
But we have service requirements.
right, that's what I'm saying.
But in addition to downtown, we're doing an independent evaluation of our streets. Not only in terms of, well, one of the things we're looking at is what do our streets, what width do we really need to have adequate pedestrian circulation, and also plantings where we're capable of planting shade trees, not just palm trees. But the other thing too is, it's really a great question, Patrick, is that we're looking at, maybe we might have to look at eliminating maybe some of the parking spaces in downtown to have those pull-offs for the Amazon deliveries, for the dropping people off, picking up. I mean, transportation's changing, and you're right, there are more vehicles that need to pull over and drop off things or whatever. So we're also looking at that in the town.
When there aren't places for them to pull over, so they just block the lane,
Right.
so you're down to a one-lane street, in almost most of the downtown neighborhoods where that's going on.
So whereas if you had designated, a couple of parallel on-street spaces to like, a delivery zone or something of that nature, that maybe that's the.
Right. Anyway, that's something to consider is whether or not with the attainable housing density bonus, you don't reduce the service percentage. If that's, somehow that's defined in your program somewhere in the charts or tables you do would be good there. We had another question come in, but it.
We have a couple more slides.
Okay, please.
We're almost wrapped up. Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Let's go on here.
So Patrick, you had mentioned the issue of association fees and how that could be structured. That really would be up to the developer on how best to structure that. There's, we've seen scenarios where the market rate units, maybe they're paying a higher fee in order to subsidize the attainable units and their fees that would be due. So it's totally up to the developer on how that would be, and the association really to how that would be structured. The city would not be involved in structuring condo fees.
Okay, if they're not involved in structuring it, you said they're required to do an annual report. Within that annual report, they'd be required to specify how the operating fees, reserve fees, if it's a condominium, or other commercial apartments, how those fees are being allocated.
The annual reporting is mainly for the rental units. The for sale units, there would be covenants recorded, dictating that this needs to be an attainable unit for a period of at least 30 years. There may not be a need to have annual reporting for the for sale units because those obviously aren't turning over as much. And then again, that's on public record that they're already to be attainable for a minimum of 30 years. So we're really talking about the attainable units with that annual reporting and monitoring.
The HOA fees happens every year, it changes every year, every budget cycle. They reallocate fees for that. And full disclosure to unit owners of a condominium who are paying the market rate or the add-on rate, if it's not disclosed to them that that's percentage of the fees, that's the differential, and how that money is being distributed annually through the budgeting process, then I think that's a disservice to put in place a plan that doesn't allow them to have full disclosure of the information. And to me, if it's part of the budgeting or something, at least gives you the percentage allocation or some way so that there is a disclosure, public disclosure, so that either the current owners or buyers, potential buyers, know what's up front besides what's in the declaration, which doesn't really maybe adjust or something.
It would be disclosed, but based on the association. I mean, it's up to the association how they want to structure those fees, how they would assess fees for the market rate units to then subsidize the attainable units, whether they're calling the attainable units common areas in order to assess the fees that way. It's totally up to the condo association to structure that, disclose that to all the owners.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, you see in condominiums where maybe the size of the unit, the fee's higher for a larger unit than a smaller unit. You can kind of use a similar scale to this, like what Ryan said. The last thing we want to see is a unit that, let's say, rents out at $1,200 a month, and their condo fees $800 a month. That doesn't make it affordable anymore. So.
Correctly. That's what we were trying to say. If the average condo downtown is close to $1,000 a month. Now, you can maybe cut some of that in half, but we're talking, 1,500, 1,600 square foot condos paying that a month. Then there's still $800 a month HOA fees for a 800 square foot unit. So that's what we're trying to say is if that is disclosed, I mean, how that's going to be handled. And it would be good if there was something in this requirements that the developer has to, not only what's in the legislation and declaration that goes to the state, but something in their report. Maybe you're saying they're supposed to show you rental units, but they show you what the percentage distribution is or something. Oh, David, sure.
As we've discussed this among ourselves with the board and with our representative owners and so forth, has the city, have you guys considered at all the possibility of splitting these two out, the corporate entities? Because the developer of an apartment building has a whole set of different rules from the developers and the owners of the condominium. And I know as you're trying to push this fairly quickly, the apartment single corporation would seem to be more easily dealt with simpler principles than the condominiums. Is it possible that maybe you separate those out? Because I think trying to educate people at the same time using both of these entities as examples is very confusing to people. In fact, we have trouble trying to figure out how would we present this to a condominium association, and it gets very much into the weeds, and make it a lot simpler to have the experience of a single organization development first, and then bring along condominiums.
And we're really gonna see, mainly these are gonna be rental units for the most part. I mean, could there be some for sale units? There could. But again, I think that needs to be up to the developer and the condo association on how they structure those fees. The city doesn't need to be involved in that. It should be up to the condo association how they want to assess those fees.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's mostly.
I don't think that's our concern, Ryan. Our concern is, how do you make sure that you abide by the rule? And that's very difficult in an ownership situation.
Sure.
You mentioned before that you were looking at other cities and how they were, the density was affecting what they're doing and the market. Are you looking also at whether they're separating rental from for sale units?
Yes. I think in
And what the
most of
differences are?
Our research, they have been keeping them separate. They haven't been doing two different text amendments.
Right, it's all in the same sections of their code and they kind of just coincide together. Sometimes they will have different lengths of requirement for affordability. So sometimes the for sale units are a longer length required than the rental in terms of affordability at 20 years versus 30 years or something like that. But not much of a difference between those two.
I think a lot of it is going to occur, and those details are in the affordable housing agreement. So for each project, it's going to be different.
Well,
Each development project?
Yes, yeah, each still will have its own unique agreement.
okay.
Yeah, I think you want.
Do you have any language that you could show us? Do you have any language at this point that shows how somebody that's actually got this in effect in their code is doing this? Because we're having trouble separating in our minds rental versus for sale units.
I can send you some of the zoning codes for other municipalities and what they're doing.
That would be helpful to us, I think.
Yeah.
We just need a couple samples, we don't need the universe.
Yeah, a few examples.
Yeah, it's the agreement.
Yeah.
I think you're looking for an example of the agreement itself, not necessarily the
Yeah,
zoning
the
code
agreement
for sale.
Well, the
units.
zoning code would be helpful too, Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay, you want one of the next ones here?
Sure.
Please,
We can just kind of summarize it. What is the city's plan for managing infrastructure with this planned density increase? And so the city looked at the raw water supply capacity and also potable water and wastewater treatment. And there's enough capacity to support the adopted future land use map classifications. So that was already adopted. The city also did a traffic concurrency initial review analysis. And so it was de minimis for the proposal. So this was the infrastructure, and the management was all looked at during the comprehensive plan amendment.
And how is that funded, the infrastructure? Are you requiring the developer to pay for it? Are you?
So there are already impact fees that are
I
required for the
understand
development.
impact fees, but are you, in addition to, or in place of, or?
We're keeping the same impact fee schedule that's consistent and adopted
Yeah,
currently.
and I mean, keep in mind, this is not gonna all happen at once. This is gonna happen over a very long period of time. Obviously, yeah, we have the impact fees that we collect, we have our CIP each year, which addresses needs as the city gradually grows. So, you know, and that's.
Well, the
but
Senate
right now-
Bill 102 might be an alternative source of funding for infrastructure.
Possibly, that's correct, that's correct. But right, we talked with each of the departments in terms of what's in place. And, you know, let's say water supply, you know, our utilities department saying we have a water supply that can handle over 80,000 people here in the city. Right now, we have
56, 57,000 permanent residents.
Yeah.
Because if you require the developer to continue paying high impact fees, you're making it tougher on them to create affordable housing.
Isn't there a discount for the attainable housing percentage of their impact fees?
Multimodal transportation impact fees, there's a discount there. The county, other than water and sewer, the county controls the rest of the fees. I know they're just, I think, passed some, an ordinance to allow for another discounting of other impact fees. Water and sewer were unable to discount due to the bond covenants associated with those fees.
I'm recalling Lofts on Lemon had impact fees to pay because something about, if it's below 60%, maybe they waive the impact fees.
They can defer them if it's correct, for the multimodal transportation impact fee. The other fees, again, the county controls.
Because if it's not reduced, it's in round numbers about $4,000 a unit for it.
It depends on the size of the
Yeah,
unit.
and I'm saying it goes up to 4,500 or 4,800, even if you assume round numbers, $4,000.
It adds up.
That's why I'm a little puzzled that there wouldn't be some forgiveness of at least the affordable components. It looks like the county is just doing that.
Yeah, so the county controls the rest of the fees. We only control transportation and water and sewer.
Right.
Yeah, the transportation, there is a reduction.
Park impact fees, is that,
County controls it.
I mean, the city doesn't sit the, but, so there's not.
We cannot discount it. If the county can, we don't have the ability, any authority, I should say, to do that. Yes, yes.
That's all the questions that we had.
So, there was a question over the chat. Will you require that attainable units be required to be for working households?
Certainly,
It's expired, you mean? Damn it.
But I guess workforce maybe.
yeah, no, it's again, yeah, I mean, so it's based on household income, and again, the area we're trying to target is that generally that 80 to 120% area median income, that middle income where, you know, they make a little too much to qualify for some of the maybe housing authority programs, but don't make enough to really be able to live in the city based on the market rate rents that are around here. So that middle income range is one of the targets here. I mean, not to say, you know, that the lower income was still eligible here too, but generally that 80 to 120%.
Other questions here?
I was at a social function a week or so ago, and a developer or somebody in real estate floated the idea of, say, it was a 200-unit project, and there were X number of affordable units that one of condos, so the developer would own the affordable units and rent those out. And it would be an area of the building with maybe not access to the full amenities of the building. The slang term, you know, is corridor, you know, I'm just
I mentioned
asking.
that before you got
Oh,
here.
you did? Okay, all right. You've talked about it before.
Yeah, so real quick, that range I was mentioning, it was 60 to 120%, not 80, 60 to 120. But yeah, just real quick, to ensure that the attainable units are interspersed throughout the building, not just on the ground floor, there's language in, we're gonna be modifying the definition, to reflect that you just can't have the units in one, ground floor basement of the building.
The concept is good about the
Yeah, I
developer
think the concept is
Right, yeah.
intriguing.
not allowing them to have access to some of the amenities.
That's part of why the question about those fees, one way to restrict your fees is they say, yes, here's we have A structure and B structure, and the A structure, you can go to the pool, but you can't use tennis courts, the gym, et cetera, wherever there's a key or something, different condos, different configurations could do that. All I'm saying is that's not, I think, what's intended. The idea of diversity and so forth is being a part of that. And most units, I think apartments, they don't restrict that. Maybe you pay more if you want an extra parking space or something. But
So you're saying they can't do it? Or you're gonna write it
We
so
would
they
have a
can't
real
do it?
problem with that.
And I think, a lot of that would be within that affordability agreement that's recorded. Certainly we're not gonna support something that's gonna have, those kinds of standards in place. That wouldn't be something the city would support.
well, I just say, make sure there's a disclosure of what their fees, plans are, et cetera. And that's all I'm saying. If that's what part of the questionnaire or something, how will your ongoing, like operating fees, reserve fees,
Was that a develop that brought that up, or was it just kind of a conversation among the people in the town?
It's a possibility. People are thinking out loud and outside the box.
And they read the New York Times, which always has a story about some condominium in New York has a separate entrance and the doorman can only open the door to the front end. So, people are thinking about
Right,
it.
that's why I said it is a part of the condominium process, you have your articles, you have your declaration, you have your bylaws, and you have your rules, and you have your budgeting, and people that have to go through that process learn that one thing's based on another, and below all that is Florida Statute 718. So some of this stuff, in terms of what can be reported, that's where I think in terms of making sure there's visibility to certain things, maybe you wouldn't make public their budget numbers, but maybe percentages, as you said, what percentage units are being recorded? How is the reserve fees, et cetera, percentage allocated across it? Is it by square footage, which smaller ones would have a smaller square footage? So, somehow if that's part of your reporting requirement annually, then I think that simply shows what decision's been made about those kinds of properties.
Yeah, and again, though, I don't know that the reporting is gonna be annually for sale units. I think you have an initial housing agreement that might have some language in there as far as, to your point, ensuring that the attainable units have the same access to amenities as the market rate units do. But in terms of how they're structuring that, again, I think that's gonna be up to the condo association. But we wanna make sure that they have equal access though to upsell amenities, and that's the intent.
Also, Victor McKeer, I'm sorry, from the Boulevard condominium, please. You have a question? You might speak up so they can hear you on the
Sure.
there.
Really appreciate you being here. Sorry that I came in a bit late. And I really appreciate some of the things you've done. It's been very interesting for me. But I gotta ask this question. Have you all, even in your assessment of the number of attainable units, the density bonuses, have you all calculated what is the figure, the number of attainable and affordable units you'd like to see created in the downtown core, period? And I'm asking that question for a very specific reason. Sometimes you get into something so complex that you, to quote a great jurist in the past, you're entering a thick, we find ourselves in a thick if we dare not enter. What I mean by that is, I don't know if you've done any judgments on what the impact will be on people who want to buy into life. Some people will think they're in New York City, and they're going to rent all the poor folk. That's the AMI between 60 through the back door. In another instance, people are going to, I wonder whether or not you really calculated how some people are going to feel who live on the 19th floor who are paying 5 figures, and yet they find out they're subsidizing somebody on the first, third, or fourth floor who's paying a lesser figure. So my first question is, have you really thought about how many units you want to see in the downtown core? And another question of import.
Can we have him answer that question so we don't lose it? I think it's a damn good question.
As many as possible.
Okay.
Okay,
A percentage, a ratio, any wild?
Well, so keep in mind, it's gonna be, for new projects, it's just gonna be, the numbers we keep hearing are again between 10 and 15%. So let's just use that as a base. For every new project, not existing, but for every new project, 10 to 15% of those bonus units would be required to be attainable. So what that comes out to roughly is probably 8 to 12% of the overall project, depending on how much density they go for. So if, and maybe I came across as a little sarcastic or whatever, but for all new projects, if we could get that kind of percentage for all new development that takes place in downtown, that would be fantastic. That would be our goal. In terms of an actual number, realistically, I've done some preliminary calculations, and it's probably, trying to be realistic too, because not every project is going to do this. Probably 800 to 1,000 in downtown. Now this doesn't include, if for some reason, the housing authority secures the property in downtown, and they can provide 100% of the units as attainable, that's a bonus. That would be a bonus. I don't think that's super likely, but it could happen. But if we could get those, and once again, this is not in the next 2 years, 5 years, this is really far out. If we could get those kind of numbers just in downtown, that would be great.
the reason why I asked the question is because it's concerning to me. You say 800 units to 1,000 units. I'm not sure what the occupancy is going to be of BLBD and the downtown core in 2030. As we're growing and we're getting larger and larger and larger. But I am concerned of the fact that there's a need for attainable units. Notice I'm using the word attainable versus the need for affordable units. I saw in the paper, I read the Observer now, where the city, after having told us in the past that no one, well, the city could build affordable housing, you leave that to the public. And yet I see that Mr. Royal announced a suggestion that the city would build affordable housing, and that kind of stunned me, and I know some other people who were part of these discussions. I'd like to find out more. You may have talked about that a bit more in the past. But I'm also very convinced, and I want to share this with you, sir, and you have to forgive me.
Right.
Mr. Ryan, forgive me. I remember we had a discussion once about Palm Beach County, where, at least in my limited purview, I saw there was there were builders who specialize in attainable housing. They're specialized. And we have people who are very unlikely, I think, to be able to buy into or join or become part of the area which is called the downtown core. But in their own communities, all over town, there may be land available for the construction of such housing in communities that they're part of. And I wondered, just in passing, whether or not bonuses could be afforded that would allow and facilitate the growth and development of attainable housing in places where people live where they are. I heard Mr. Loberts, the gentleman who ran for last time, he gave you all a very, very important speech talking about the increase of transportation. in the area. And yes, there are many people who do that, but you already have communities here that have housing that's really attainable through developers who specialize in the construction of attainable housing. And maybe it's a little bit difficult to conceive of, knowing, Ms. Culver, you already said, you don't know how many units you're going to build. That a year out or 2 years out, you may find that you have exactly as many attainable houses in the downtown core you had this time last year, none. That are being built by the most luxurious, the most high-priced builders. What, in 30 square miles? Is it possible that perhaps as part of what you're thinking about here, that you put so much time and effort into, that perhaps you might consider putting attainable houses in the places where people live, enhance your transportation effort, just in case you don't get that target 800 to 1,000 in the year 2040?
But it's a great question. We actually have a second part to this effort where we are looking to incentivize attainable housing in other areas of the city. Certainly along our major commercial corridors, North and South Tamiami, Fruitville, 301. We also already have in place an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which now the state is saying it has to be affordable. That's citywide. And what you're saying is exactly our goal is to have attainable housing throughout the city. The only reason we're focusing on downtown right now, this is the first part, a really geographically two-part initiative.
And the zoning code is very different downtown too.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it is. So we are absolutely doing that, and to us, it's critical that the attainable housing is spread out throughout the city. There are areas and neighborhoods, I think you're absolutely correct. Now, one of the things that we're finding, and this is something we discovered through the census process, is that we have, at least that we know of, 1,100 or more residences that are being Airbnb or being rented out as vacation rentals. When you look back to 2010, when we had the last census, there probably weren't a lot of those. A lot of these houses maybe were rented for $1,500 a month or $1,800 a month. Now are gone. They're not available because they can probably make that in a week versus a month. So you think 1,100 dwelling units throughout the city that have shifted this different source of income. That has taken some of the affordability, obviously, out of Sarasota. So that was another reason why we really are focusing on trying to make this have attainable housing throughout the city.
So are you saying that there could be a bonus situation for existing residential homes as well as new construction? I mean, if you get 1,100 units that are attainable already in existence, how do you get them onto the market for affordability? What kind of bonus do you convince the landowner he can get to rent his house at an affordable rate?
Not talking single family.
Yeah, right.
Those are out of the question, although the accessory,
A quadruplex or
Yeah.
a triplex.
the accessory dwelling units do apply to the single
Right,
family.
and I'm talking about, because there is, Gulf Coast Foundation is looking through John Thaxton at, and then the guardrails fell off with the COVID, but they were convinced that they're gonna fund 100 existing homes by providing the first and last month's rent and a security deposit, because that's what was holding people who couldn't afford these out of the housing areas, which seemed to make sense. And if you factor in the 1,100 units that you just mentioned, in some kind of bonus system that didn't require new construction, you take a bite out of the raw.
Do you have any idea what these Airbnb houses are renting for?
It's
Varies based on
I'm sure it's a
location.
range, but
Yeah, certainly not at an affordable rate.
Well, I know from personal experience because my daughter rented one of them at Christmas in Gillespie Park. And I was shocked at what she paid.
Yeah.
She paid in 1 week more than what that house would rent for on a monthly basis.
Exactly, that's the point, and that's, all those houses have come off now the market, because now they're being, considered short-term vacation rentals, so that's even less of a supply, less inventory that you have for rental units, which also helps exacerbate the issue we have here with affordability.
Okay, I know we wanted to try and finish up at 6:30, but, Vic, you had another question?
Yeah.
There's one more we had from online.
Mr. Carver and Ryan, ladies and gentlemen, there's one other thing I think that perhaps you might think about that you have not calculated, or at least may not have looked at. That's the impact that such a system that includes housing as you structure it, what impact it may have on potential buyers into these places. I can tell you right now that many people had no dream, no thought, no concept that their homes, they would have to pay a share of somebody else's fees. And that may be a detractor to the value in some people's mind. People may be making decisions where their lawyers at the time of closing have to figure out what the difference is between what the developer decided to put in condo A as the methodology versus what the developer put in condo B. You may create a whole line of competition that we may not have seen, that may not be favorable to any potential buyer. And so as a consequence, this may be a thicket we do not enter because of the confusion that will be caused. I can tell you that there are people in our building who love the concept of the housing you're doing. But there are other people who hate it and who don't understand what's going on. And David is right. People are talking all over town trying to figure out who's going to be living over here or over here. And the word NIMBY now means something to me. When I lived in Mississippi, I didn't know what it meant. And so as a consequence, perhaps you might want to discuss with some of the developers, some of the occupants who already are here, people who bought their houses or rented their houses in the cityscape who don't care for what BLVD did because it blocked their view of something. Because it is confusing.
But keep in mind that it doesn't affect any of the existing buildings. So that we're only talking about new construction from this point on. So
It's important to know that, it's probably not gonna be every building that's gonna have attainable housing. Right. Some of the developers, their whole market is those 4,000 square foot units like at the Jewel, and they're not gonna put any attainable housing in. There might be some that want to put attainable housing and get this bonus. So it's gonna be a mix. So there's still gonna be new buildings, I think, where people can afford to buy something that doesn't have attainable housing units in it.
Thank you. If we could, we had one last question here, and I'll just make it a little more generic. It had to do with, you talked about the percentage of affordable housing units within the development. So if there's 100 unit, and we have 15 or whatever percentage it is that going to be tied to some tiered density? Too. You said you want to get an even distribution across 3 tiers.
Right.
And so is there a different, to get bigger density, you have a higher, number of units, percentage units, et cetera, to do that. So
that's a great question. And we've had several recommendations of looking at that, and we have investigated it. What we don't want to do by having a tier system where maybe percentage is lower, well, either way. But, most of what we heard was, well, if they go for the 200, then maybe it should be 30% of the units, and then 150, 20. We don't want to get in a situation where the numbers are so high that it's a deterrent, and then we don't get anything. And I think if you start talking about numbers that are that high, we probably are not going to get any takers. The last thing we want to do is have numbers that look good in terms of, and then no one actually does it.
but even if you had the lower scale, when you still have a scale, or would it just be one number in, for any density?
Yeah, I think we'll keep it simple and I think too, it's, I don't know, let's take that example of 50 units going to 200. If 30%, if you go to 200, let's just say I want to do 200, and 30% of those have to be attainable, that's 60 units out of 200. That's a big number. That's going to be, and I think just from the feedback we've been getting from the business community, developers, they're going to look at that. We're not doing it. But
Whatever the number, I guess my question is, would there be a different percentage of units required based upon the density bonus they were getting? You know, would it be tied that way, or simply, you know, you get, you know, if we get 200 units versus 150 units or 100 units, is there a different number of percentage unit commitment? Yeah. I mean, what's the differential between just asking for, 100 versus 200%, or 100 units versus 200 units?
I think, with all the people we talked to and the research we've done, I think we really are zeroing in on having one set percentage for projects.
But still having to divide it across the.
Yes,
right.
that's central to this, ensuring you have a mix of incomes.
Exactly.
That's basically a third.
And I'll tell you, we've run that by a lot of people, the third concept. And
You may not know what their income is. How are you gonna,
That's where the annual reporting comes in for the rental units. So
how are you gonna document the accuracy of those figures?
It's all laid out in the affordable housing agreement, what's gonna be required in order to income qualify them. There's forms that they're gonna be given and they'll have to do that.
Just like lump sum.
People cheat, Brian.
No.
I have one, I'm living directly above me.
I want to ask.
Well, Medicare has a whole system, they do it every year to establish the premium. You gotta justify your income to get Medicare, and if you make too much money and the IRS is written, then your premium goes up, but you don't get it for the rate, so there's certainly systems out there that
There are.
checks and balances.
And the housing authorities, they do it with their projects, so.
Right.
Let's cook it. I know you're on a schedule, you sort your timeline for things and so forth. Will there be a point when we can see the red line DTA before it goes in front of the planning board?
Oh, most definitely. So we have the.
Commentary on.
Yeah, no, we have the town hall on March 1st, right? So kind of another chance to get an opportunity to get more feedback and input. And then from there, we suspect we'll finalize a draft with the strike through line in the month of March, and then file, and then it's public, right? And certainly it's well before it gets to the planning board.
Okay. David, I'll let you finish up here if you want to say any final words or things.
And really, any other thoughts or suggestions you have, feel free to pass them on.
Okay, well, I will say thank you. We'll have the recording here and the slides, and we have our newsletter, scheduled to go out here. Hopefully we can include this, and that gets a very broad distribution there, and we'll put in there, I'll look through whichever email contacts, et cetera, for that. I know you have a website.
Yes.
Some of these slides are on the website, et cetera, from there, and we'll direct people to find Attainable Housing website too.
Good.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate you being here.
Yes.